welcome everybody, and this is the StandICT Standards Academy training webinar on open source and standardization. I would take a few minutes to introduce this webinar and contextualize it within the StandICT.eu 2026 project before we actually begin with this outstanding lineup of speakers that we have today. In this way, we will allow people to slowly join us and join the room. I will share my screen now. I hope that you can see it. So this webinar has been developed within the StandICT 2026 project, which is an Horizon Europe project whose main objective is to support the participation of European standardization specialists in key international standard development organizations. This project runs funding scheme to support specialists to contribute and help create a fully integrated European standardization ecosystem. And together with this funding provided to the standardization experts, the project has set up a Standards Academy, providing useful resources and material to support both experts and those who are not very familiar with standardization concept, with practical tools to improve their knowledge on the ICT standardization activities. And this webinar is embedded within the activities of the Standards Academy. And the work and activities developed within this framework of the project are developed and led especially by the Fraunhofer Institute, led by Professor Knut Blind, who is one of the speakers at today's webinar. The consortium of StandICT is also made up of Trust IT Services, Dublin City University, Australo, and Open Forum Europe, together with European Digital SME. As I mentioned, the project ran a funding scheme, and right now is managing the fourth open call, which is going to be closed on the 12th of April 2024. And if you are interested in getting funds for your standardization, for funding your standardization activities, you can apply on the website platform and submit your proposal. So before going ahead and hand over to Professor Blind, I will just give a few housekeeping rules, just to say that this event will be recorded, and the recording will be available rightly after the end of the event, together with the slides provided by the speakers. And we would like to encourage you to interact in the chat box and submit your question into the Q&A box. The speakers will address them directly, both in the chat and in the live session. would also recommend that you follow the discussion in the chat, because where is the place where you will also find resources, links to useful material and information. And with that, I will be glad to introduce and leave the floor to Professor Blind. I will stop sharing now.
Oh. Yeah, thank you, Gabriele. And also thank you all the kind of co-organizers and co-contributors to this event. I'm very happy that you found the time to be here. And I think we have a very kind of important list of players here in the game. We have Jory Burson and Mirko Böhm from the Linux Foundation Europe, Silona Bonewald was previously with IEEE and now connected to Explics and another organization, but she will tell more about that. We have Daniel Haag from DIN, kind of an SDO here. And finally, we have also industry, especially IBM as a player on both sides, both the open source and the standardization kind of a game field. And therefore, I think this is really a nice group of speakers. And again, thanks for your time. And I took the chance, and now I try to share my slides here to, you see him? Yeah, no. To look back, yeah, and thanks to Mirko, we were able to do a study for the GRC. Look, next slide. 5 years ago, and about the relationship between open source software and standard setting, and we concluded with some findings, and I tried to review them to look what happened in the last 5 years, and this might be also a good starting point and for the other speakers to jump on this. So also what happened meanwhile, also together with Mirko, OFE, and others, we did some impact study on the role of open source. In parallel, Ernst & Young and others did some similar study related to standards. And I'm not going into details. I could do a whole webinar on these two studies, but I'm not doing this. But overall, both open source and standards have really significant impact on the economy, on the society of the EU. That's I think now we have some empirical evidence that this is very important for our economic development, but also for societal developments in the EU. And therefore, the question is, maybe we can even leverage this by combining these two instruments in a better way than this has been the case in the past. And this leads me now to what we presented. I think this was before Corona times. We really met several times and had intensive discussion to come up with some conclusions. And I try to kind of review them and put them into the context what's happened in the last 5 years, and also what's the current state of play. Yeah, first of all, we observed that the governance in the SDOs and the open source community are quite different. That's still the case. Just for your information, at the European and also at the national levels, different SDOs are doing some governance reviews. We will see whether and how they might change, also whether they might also take kind of open source as an interesting and relevant input into account. That's one aspect. The other aspect, I will come back on that later, and also the other speakers will look at that, is we have many new EU regulations, and now more and more are really also mentioning the relevance of open source. like the Cyber Resilience Act, the AI Act, but also in the General Product Safety Regulation, make links to open source, and this will have implications. And these implications might also maybe challenge the governance of open source communities, but we might also discuss that later. That's the first observation. Then about the stakeholders, I think here this has not changed much, but what we even kind of have to underline is that for open source, especially small and even micro companies and one-man or one-woman shows contribute very significantly to open source in the EU, whereas in the US it's more the major contribution by the big techs. Yeah? That's one aspect. The other point is the involvement of experts in both communities. This is still, according at least to the experts we are serving in the context of the German standardization panel, quite limited. That means there are a few players which are active on both sides, but the overlap is not yet there. It's there certainly for big players like we have later with IBM and others, but for the broad kind of majority of companies and organizations, that's not yet the case. But I think that's a very important step we have to see in the future in order really to leverage and exploit the synergies. The other point is here where we first made the statement that there are not really global organizations, with the exception of the IEEE ISO and ITU. However, we see now, and we will have later Jory and Mirko here, that the open source foundations are becoming much more global. For example, Linux Foundation might serve as a good example to be quite active in Europe. Then Mirko and another former PhD of mine, they published a paper on the scenarios of specification first, implementation first, or parallel of development of standards and open source. There is some indeed very new evidence by colleagues from Sweden who at least show that there is here and there evidence that open source reference implementations of standards is taking place in different organizations. That's an issue which is still more on an anecdotal level. Then the interaction and collaboration here, unfortunately, we have not so much new kind of empirical evidence. At least I couldn't find one. Maybe here from the participants, there are ideas and maybe hints to also maybe provide some updates here, but at least I couldn't find. This parallel developments here, we will see later some statements also by Mirko. And the combination of the two processes are still an issue, and maybe also Daniel can kind of give us some insights on what's going on, for example, at DIN, to really kind of combine the two processes in a closer and better way. That means here, unfortunately, we have not really more evidence on this topic. Last point about the IPR regimes. There is not so much going on in the IPR regimes. Here and there minor changes, but I also tried to kind of get some feedback from the experts, and nobody could really tell me big changes. But maybe again, I'm also here to get updated here regarding the licensing schemes. Fortunately, GitHub now kind of developed and presented its innovation graph, and here's also a list of the popular licenses, and here. This is more or less reflecting what we have found 5 years ago about the most kind of popular licensing schemes. here also no new evidence regarding the incompatibility between the licensing schemes in SDOs and open source communities. Here, a new kind of regulation is going to come on stained essential patents, which might have at least an indirect influence on the relationships also between the licensing scheme of open source communities and the SDOs. We have to see is a little bit maybe a speculative statement, but we have, I think, sufficient time to discuss. Yeah, to sum up, I do not see big changes, much change between the standardization and open source kind of institutions and communities and also practices. However, please correct me. But what we see is the external framework conditions are going to change. We see on the one hand the regulatory framework is more and more reflecting open source. I think here also the future kind of IPR framework conditions have to maybe reflect this in a better way than it has been done in the past. And we have also some geopolitical kind of significant changes going on, which has also implications on both activities, both in standardization and in open source communities. This external kind of forces and frictions and tension have to be reflected, and at the end it might be also influence the relationship between open source and standardization. And I close with this now. If we have time later, we can also come back on what we recommended 5 years ago, but so far that's enough from my side. Thank you. And I hand over now to Jory and Mirko.
Thank you so much, Dr. Blind, for having us. So Mirko and I are going to present on bridges to cross, some of the philosophical and procedural differences between SDOs and open source communities. My name is Jory Burson. I'm the VP of Standards for the Linux Foundation, and I work with all of our projects that are working on a standards project themselves through an open specification type process, or open source projects that have a specification development component to them. Mirko, do you want to introduce yourself quickly?
Hello, so thanks for having us today. I'm Mirko Böhm. I'm the Senior Director for Community Development at Linux Foundation Europe. And in the past, Kim and I have worked together on various studies around the tension between open source and standards development. So I'm really looking forward to that today.
So we wanted to start with some success. I think it's important to highlight that, as Knut noted, that there hasn't been a ton of improvement, but in the open source world, 5 years is practically a whole new generation. And in fact, I think we've seen at the day-to-day operational level some pretty good changes in positive direction that we wanted to share. So just for some context, in the last during the period that Knut and Mirko were working on that first research project, we founded the Joint Development Foundation, which is part of the Linux Foundation now, to establish some infrastructure and policies that would be necessary and beneficial for projects that want to conduct open source and specification development activities together under one roof as a first priority. OASIS, actually, I saw Jamie in the participants list. OASIS Open similarly launched an open projects program during that period. And today, the JDF is now home to 33 different distinct projects that are developing open source alongside specifications in order to tackle issues like cybersecurity, climate change, and sustainability. These are often developed alongside other activities that are happening at SDOs, because these are pretty big problems, and if we're going to solve them, we need to solve them together. The LF itself is home to over 230 distinct open specification projects, and that number is accelerating. So sharing some examples today of how our open source community is already collaborating with you all in the standards development space, I think is a great start to our conversation. So I think the first thing that we wanted to share is the rise of the community specifications that we've been seeing. For open source projects, collaboration is typically really lightweight, and you will have a lot of people that only contribute one time because they've found like a bug in the software that they use, or they want to submit a patch, and then they're going to go back to sort of tending their own garden, so to speak. And so open source governance is different as a result of that. And going back to that contributor to get them to comment on a change isn't always as feasible. That said, the open projects that we work with really are wanting to do a lot more collaboration on spec development. They understand the value that standardization as a process provides, and they want to take those benefits and attributes of open source with them into their spec development process. So they want to use the tools like Git for version control and publication, and they want to understand that any new tools and processes that they have to learn are going to provide some clear benefit to that process. So they've been really successfully adopting the things that they know into governance and patterns from standards making for decision making, for example, for notification, that sort of thing, and incorporating them into their software development workflows using some procedures and patterns that we provide here at the LF. These tools really enable great contribution and feedback gathering, and we think that's been a very additive process to our standards developing communities. The community specification licensed projects that we have really come to understand that source code licenses alone aren't always sufficient for the goals that they might have. If they want to be able to take the specification that they've developed together to another organization, a consortia, or another standards developing body like ECMA, that they need to perhaps be educated about IPR beyond their knowledge of OSI licenses. And they may also need to adapt their governance processes to suit. So that's part of the reason why in 2020, we developed the community specification license at the Joint Development Foundation, so we can start to incorporate terms and processes that are required for specification development, like legal terms, IPR process, due process, that sort of thing, to safely allow these projects to then be contributed into another type of organization. In most open source projects, and also a lot of times in standards development working groups, it's not always the case that our participants are going to have strong legal backgrounds or a strong understanding of the legal frameworks under which they're operating. So while we've been seeing some applications of perhaps an MIT license to a spec project that may not quite be the best suited, they're starting to understand that they need to get educated and get the right IPR, because clean IP is happy IP. So we're also leveraging a lot of tools that we've developed at the LF to help track that IP, like EasyCLA, for example. And we're also seeing a lot of open source community contribution of new tools and resources that end up being helpful for standards developing organizations for things like IP tracking, or even just producing a spec in a more automated way, like MetaNorma. I think many of your organizations might use MetaNorma. Let's see, next slide. Let's skip ahead. Why not? There we go. A number of our projects are also really looking to engage more with SDOs and consortia, in part because they're looking to drive impact for things like connected to our sustainable development goals. And they want to work with other organizations that can help them measure and assess that impact. So that's, I think, a great example of how open source and standards organizations really are working really well together. We've done a lot of liaison agreements or memorandums of understanding with other standards organizations and technical committees, ETSI, ECMA International. I saw Samina, hi Samina. They're doing this not just in a like, okay, well, let's put our logos on each other's website sort of way, but in a very targeted way to drive impact for technical collaboration. So they're working on shared demos, they're working on implementations, they're working on new features or support tooling, as I mentioned. They're doing joint summits and workshops. For example, we did the web platform security workshop with several different SDOs and open source projects involved in that to go explore gaps in standardization there. So these have been really fruitful conversations, and my hope is, of course, that they will grow more work in progress on other things in the future. And there's a sustainability report too that touches a little bit on some of our wins on that front for those interested. Of course, to do this, we need to find the right partners and stakeholders. We have found that an increase in engagement in our open source projects is leading to an increase of engagement and interest in the standards side, and also vice versa, right? I think that they can be great lead gen for each other, quite frankly. But they're looking for organizations that, our projects are looking for organizations that kind of provide an extra dimension to their activities, because they're helping them connect with bigger impact for some of those SDGs, as I mentioned. They're looking for greater interoperability with other efforts to make sure that things that they are pushing forward are matching and tracking with what other organizations are doing from a best practices alignment standpoint. And they're looking for partners who provide more insight into challenges they might have and opportunities they might face. I think one of our greatest examples of this is the Coalition for Content Provenance and Authenticity, which is a small spec, but it's having quite a mighty impact and reach in terms of getting involved with members of the US, EU, and UK government, with consortia like Content Authenticity Initiative, and then also with several of the ISO working groups on graphics and multimedia. So that sort of wide review, wide feedback, big tent approach that comes from open source is really starting to impact some of our small specification projects. And we cannot wait to see what else we can put forward as great examples to grow on. I'm going to hand it over to Mirko now to describe some of the other bridges we are crossing.
Great, thank you, Jory. But before we jump in, I want to highlight that this has been quite an interesting journey for me, because in the study that Knut and I worked on about 5 years ago, or published 5 years ago, one thing we wrote about is the converging role, or the converging roles of standards development organizations and open source foundations as platforms for collaboration and consensus building in the industry. And that was quite some time ago. And as we published this, we were quite questioned about this. Like, is this really happening? Is this really the case? Today, for 1 year now, I work at the Linux Foundation. And I represent the Linux Foundation at the multi-stakeholder platform for ICT standardization. So yes, I think this is happening. So I'm super happy today to present here with Jory. If we can go to the next slide, I would like to highlight a few of the bridges we still need to build. So Jory has highlighted successes that we've seen, and I think we're not quite done yet. So yes, we made good progress, but there are a couple of well, let's say more difficult problems to solve, I think, that are still open, and then we need to keep in mind when we talk about this the evolving relationship between standards development and open source development. The first thing I would like to highlight, and I don't mean this to sound too controversial, But I want to highlight that standards development is actually not a goal in itself. Why are we doing it is the question. It's a step to achieve the regulability of the markets. And it's a step to achieve wide adoption of technical solutions to realize economies of scale. It's quite the utilitarian approach. That was one of the starting points of our research, where we said, what are ways to achieve these goals if we rethink standards development so that the explanations also cover what open source communities do. And to get that to kind of unify the theoretical approaches here, we start to differentiate standardization instruments, things that can achieve regulability and adoption of technical solutions into the market, and analyze how they achieve this effect that standards are being diffused. We realize that all standards development processes go through 4 phases: ideation, specification, implementation, and diffusion. You start from, I need a standard to achieve my goals, and you end up with the standard is adopted in the market. And the question is, how do you get from the starting point to the end point? What is quite interesting is that these phases don't necessarily apply in the same order. If you look at, let's say, more technical standards that have been developed in the open source community versus formal standards developed in standards development organizations. Essentially, the open source community walks through these phases more in the order of ideation, implementation, and then specification as needed, and solutions diffuse into the market. And the more traditional approach would be, from ideation, you go to specification, you make an explicit description of what you want to build, and then implementation follows. But if you think of these phases as separate steps that a standards development process walks through, and as the sequence as kind of the character of the process, more open source focused or more standards development focused, you realize that they're, in terms of what they're doing, not too far apart. But there's one question that remains, and that's which sequence is better in which case. And the explanation that we came up with is that cost of change is one of the key aspects that drives these decisions of the participants in what would they do first, spend more time on specification or go into implementation. And as you can expect, the implementation first approach is more common in the open source community. Why is that the case? Because cost of change is a lot lower if you release software and you realize there's a problem with the software, you have a bug fix, and you distribute that freely. And your downstream users can very easily adopt that change. So the cost of fixing a bug in the Linux kernel is relatively low. And the turnaround time on that, the pace of innovation, is very fast. In comparison, if you think of, for example, specifications for hardware interfaces, etc., they're very difficult to change once they're in the market. They require recalls of laptops and things like that. So their cost of change is higher. And naturally, because the change cannot be so easily distributed, the pace of innovation is a little slower. And somewhere in the middle is a breaking point where you say, if cost of change is very low, then I go for an implementation first approach. And if it's very high, then I go for a specification first approach. And frankly, I think if you kind of take the opportunity to think in this model, you realize that a lot of the processes that we see today in real life can be described this way. For example, we have iterative approaches. You see this a lot in programming language development, where the standard is only updated if an implementation exists that shows that a new feature is working. And they go through shorter iterations, maybe 3 to 6 months. That's just going through these phases in a repetitive way. So it's quite a powerful way to describe standards development as a process of going from a need to standardize to a diffuse solution in the market. Yeah, so cost of change, I think that's kind of what I would like you to take away. It really drives the distinction between implementation first and specification first approaches. The next topic I would like to highlight is that there's a fundamental difference between the traditional thinking of standards development and the way open source communities work. And that is that in an open source environment, we engage in continuous collaborations that are not intended to end at some point. And this is really in contrast because the traditional model of standards development is pre-competitive collaboration. You agree on a framework to collaborate between companies, businesses that are otherwise competitors, and you have a clear point where this ends and the companies kind of step away from the table and start competing with each other again with products that are compliant with the standard that has been developed. And this thinking is kind of antithetic to open source development, because our idea in the open source world is that we jointly work together on an implementation, and there's no point in a competing implementation if this implementation is available to everybody for free, and everybody who is an interested stakeholder can participate in development. So we achieve interoperability by basically making the same solution available for every use case. We achieve the adoption of technical solutions by jointly developing a very powerful one that is freely available. And I claim we can be quite efficient with that. And this is when we talk about how to get an ongoing collaboration between standards development and open source implementation to work, this is one of the topics where I have not found yet or heard yet a good answer that supports this. Because, as I said, there's no motivation in the open source environment to kind of stop collaborating and going back to competition. Okay, if we go to the next one. The next topic I need to address, and I know this is a sensitive one, is the definition of openness. In open source, we distinguish very clearly between open governance, which is that the research and development process is open to all interested stakeholders to contribute as equals, to understand how the process is performed, to have transparency about all the decisions that are being made. There are some kind of principles that have developed around this, like it didn't happen if it's not publicly discussed and things like that. That's governance for us. And in contrast to that, we have openly licensed outcomes. And that means the result is freely available for everybody to use, study, modify, and redistribute. And that's what open source licensed means. So if we have an understanding, open has two dimensions, the development process and the licensing of the outcomes. And commonly, when that's one of the points where, let's say there's a divergence of vocabulary between standards development organizations and open source communities. Because if you say openness means everybody can participate in the process, but we're not licensing the outcomes openly, that is not the understanding of open that the open source community would apply. For us, speaking from an open source community perspective, an open standard must be one that must be openly licensed, which means that all agreements to use the technology to implement it must be done before the use of the technology begins, as with open source licenses, and there's no negotiation required between potential rights holders and users. That's our understanding of openness. And I understand that these are difficult points. So in the next slide, I would like to wrap this up with basically saying what we see here is a contest of philosophies. Contest in the sense that we have different approaches, and that with the emergence of large open source collaborations, we basically have another approach that wasn't there, let's say, 30 years ago. And that's competing for attention in a way. And where do we see these differences in philosophy? One is, for example, an approach of carefully developing a specification so that the technology is ready when it starts to be produced and enters the market, as opposed to wild experimentation, which you see in the open source community. We have the idea of release early, release often, of letting many approaches compete until one crystallizes that is the best one. And yes, there's a lot of waste in this process, but it's also super competitive. So yes, different philosophies. The one aspect that's also, I think, slightly different is that we always believe that open source is global. If we release technology, it is always available to everybody. There's no distinction where you come from, what you want to use it for, is actually inherent and required by the licensing model, that the technology is available to everybody. That means a regional industrial policy to, for example, make sure that certain industry sectors are strong in a certain region is kind of, well, let's say, difficult to make work with an open source approach, especially because once you release something as open source technology, it's very difficult to rein in. So, for example, to maintain control over who uses what crypto technologies where in the world is difficult if it's open source. The next thing I want to highlight is that if specifications are useful in the software development process, they're usually a part of the development process, a small fraction. It's not the focus of your work. And I've not met an open source developer who thinks of themselves as primarily a specification developer. It's something that you do as part of your work. And people usually refer to themselves as software developers or contributors. And they do spec work as it's necessary, but then they go back to implementation. So basically, there's no career in open source of being a professional spec writer or participant in standards development. And that's slightly different, might be a bit scary, but I think that's just a fact of life here. This is how it is. And the last point I want to highlight is that we see more commonalities between how standards development organizations and open source communities work in the idea of process standards. Why is that the case? Because the process describes how the development of or the production of a solution needs to be done. And that's there, the actual like standards development is very similar between open source and an SDO. Versus when we look at technical specifications, where it's actually the question of, do I go for implementation first or for specification first, where we see more procedural differences, or especially difference in the sequence of things. So all of these, for me, are alternative philosophies or approaches to certain the development of certain technical solutions. And my idea here, my suggestion is to say, let these standardization instruments compete. Let the world kind of find out which one is more suitable to which situation. And that's already happening. Kind of that's the impact that the open source community had on the standards development world. But there's one aspect to this that is important, and that is standards development organizations currently are part of our well-established, recognized political environment. Open source communities, not so much. That means if you want to let these two instruments compete on equal terms, then we need to recognize open source software stewards, as they're called in the CLA, at the same level as standards development organizations. And I want to stop here and give back to Jory. Thank you.
Sorry, thank you, Mirko. So just to share some parting thoughts from our team, we just want to convey that there's a really high degree of excitement and optimism, cautious excitement and optimism, goodwill, interest, etc. I think in chat, and then also just now we've shared several examples of where we are seeing practitioners of both start to walk comfortably in both spaces, share, bring their perspectives, bring their knowledge, and we want to encourage that that pattern to continue. We should be encouraging more dialogue between our groups, more liaison relationships, more cooperative, targeted projects where we can find those, and really hope to work further with our communities and some of the SDOs to continue to foster that. I think we think that, of course, working together under that big tent approach almost always derives a better outcome for everybody. There's a high degree of opportunity for us to learn from each other through these collaborative projects. We have found a great deal of success inviting experts from different domains to come in, bring a perspective to a project, help them look at something in a slightly different way, understand the importance of process, of governance, or of moving quickly, of using some new open source tools, learning something like GitLab or GitHub GitHub. That cross-training, we think, is really crucial to unlocking the potential for these organizations and these projects to drive the greatest impact for society and for culture. So that concludes our portion of the presentation. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you, Jory. Thank you, Mirko, for giving us kind of the Linux Foundation perspective. You got already some questions in the chat you could start to answer. And my pleasure is now to hand over to the next lady, Silona Bonewald.
Hi, my name is Silona Bonewald. I'm fairly new to standards in the whole standardization world, in that I've only been doing it for like 5 years or so, but I have done a lot of different stuff in regards to internal standardization, a lot of policies, processes, things of that nature. So when it comes to a lot of those different portions, it's like, well, yes, open source is new to standards and governance and things, but we do handle a lot of stuff in regards to production readiness and scale and all of those different policies. And I believe that those learnings can come in. One of the things I kind of feel like I'm coming in, and it's like we had like, I don't know if y'all seen those videos on YouTube where it's like tell it in 5 ways, where there's like the super advanced one, and then there's like the medium one, and then it's like tell it to a 5-year-old. I think I'm probably more in the tell it to the 5-year-old category. So, and that's because of the fact that I do view myself as being so new to so much of this, because it seems like when I was at IEEE, everyone there had been doing it for decades. And that to me kind of sums up a lot of what's happening for a lot of those different pieces. If you do look at the majority of standards, it is dominated by people who have been doing standards for a very long time. The processes haven't changed very dramatically. They're trying to get there, things of that nature. One of the things that I joke about a lot is because of it being so much, some of the processes being so much older, there's this book called the CIA's Manual of Trickery and Deception. And it's basically all these different ways to kill a community. And a lot of it looks like standardization processes. So there's a huge culture gap to me between standards and open source, even open standards. And sometimes I think using the word open ended up causing even more conflict because of bad expectation management for different people that are coming in. And so, I think the big discussion to have on a lot of this is why. Why are we here? Why are they there? What are the different motivational factors? Because so much of I see, operationally speaking, ends up being the how. And the how, without truly understanding everyone's why, ends up being a cargo cult mentality, which is, where a bunch of people sat there and said, oh, well, if we do these things, we get these magical results. And that's not necessarily true if you don't understand the why. And so for it, I feel like there needs to be a better explanation of the why open source does what they do and how they do it, and why standards does what they do and why they do it. And that ends up, from that, we can actually start to find the middle grounds between the two different groups. One of the things that I'm working on right now is something called OSGov, which is open source governance, and we're doing that over at the Eclipse Foundation. We ended up having some cultural clashes with trying to do that at IEEE because of all the different processes. We really wanted to develop it in Git. We didn't want to develop it in a document, passing documents around, doing some of those older structures. We really wanted to have a lot of different things along those lines. So right now we're doing it with kind of a minimum amount of the normal processes that are happening. And so one of the things that is my responsibility over there is to figure out the why. Why do the standards want certain things in certain formats? Why do they want some of these other different pieces? Why are all of those things in place? So that when we finish, we can give them something that they actually want without necessarily having to do a process that's more antithetical to the culture and the way of doing things. And so that's a big part of what's happening. Some of the things that I think are evolving that, like Jory pointed out earlier, is the tooling. There's a lot of different open source tooling that we're doing. In fact, I was even on this one copyright group's presentation last year, and they were talking about the AI tooling that they were starting to do for the specifications portion, especially for doing the technical ones, which, you know, is both awesome and terrifying. Because it's like, okay, well, if the AI looks at a standard and then decides if you're adhering to it or not, that can be problematic, just as like trying to figure out how people are adhering to the law is problematic. So because culture is such a big deal. One thing that I think of over and over again whenever I deal with any of these different things is the misquoted but still accurate meme of culture eats strategy for breakfast. And I look at a lot of the different things that a lot of these different groups are doing, and I'm like, if you don't address this culture issue, you're still not going to be very successful at it. And that's what I see for those different pieces. I find that normally in open source communities, people are still struggling with governance in general, much less moving over into the standards world. And so when I bring up standards, it ends up being a big deal. I did this one 5-minute presentation at Scale that was a 5-minute lightning talk. And that was when I first had a bunch of people coming up to me afterwards going, what is this? What are you talking about? This is so new to us. How do we get involved in it? You know, we care about this. Because one of the major points I made is if you don't start standardizing and you don't start participating in these things, you're going to get regulated. And the regulations are probably not going to be what you want. And then this year, hello, CRA, where a lot of people freaked out going, oh, we don't have these things in place. We don't know how to do it. Now, where do we go? How do we do it? And so that's one of the big things that I see happening is looking at those different portions and going, okay, I think that open source has a lot to give standards. I think that we have a lot in tooling. I think a lot of our processes are very focused on consensus building that could be really useful. I think we have a lot to give in regards to innovation and speed and accountability and making sure that things are citable and all of those different things happen. I think standards has a lot to give open source in regards to helping with those processes, helping with safety, preventing some of these gotchas that we're starting to create in governance, like the IPR issue. Lord knows I've got some scars from that personally, where did not choose the right license, also did not have the license for everything, and had one of my open source projects get killed because of it. So I think that there's a real thing that's there. In regards to the culture, with open source wins when it comes to recruiting. Sorry, standards is not very good at it. Most people, the reason that they're there is because they are paid to be there. They do not actually want to be there. The standards process can be very onerous, can be very difficult. It's rarely ever fun. And so you end up having this dominance in regards to it, where it's like, who is paid to be there? Who is paid to put up and have the patience to do all these different things? I would even sit there and say that the personality types completely clash. People often come over into open source because of freedom, right? And they want to be able to do what they need to do without a lot of constraints on it. And so that becomes a very hard thing for any of those people to come over. Now, you do have exceptions. I think, ironically, one of the funny groups that I think will be more interested in doing that is some communities that haven't always been acknowledged, which would be like the architects and designers. They're used to creating specifications. They're used to coming up with those different pieces. They're used to looking for the interoperability, the componentization, all of those different pieces, but they haven't gotten true acceptance all the time in the open source community. And so I think that that could be those different middle grounds where we can actually start to connect and intersect as to what we do and why we're doing it, so that we can actually start to get those cultural overlaps in regards to some of those more controversial issues. I think, though, the biggest problem that I see is that of complexity. Standards love to get with it on the edge cases. And that's very difficult, I think, a lot of times for the open source community, because they're always looking for the MVP, the minimum viable product. And if we don't figure out a way to do that, but in regards to standards, if you don't focus in on that, you will get things that become impossible to implement. And you will get things that will limit technology and its evolution and limit people being able to go through and do the innovation that they need to do. So when I look at a lot of this, I'm often sitting there going, where are these little bridge points that we can help each other out on? And how can we make those easier? I think open source could really help lower the emotional load of standards. We do a lot of things in our open source communities to make them friendly, to make them easier to engage with, to prevent some of the bad behaviors. I think like one of the ones that I love a lot is an open source. You've got such good records and accountability that when someone brings up the old argument, once again, I'll just make one up, which isn't true, tabs versus spaces. You've got that dude every year, he brings up the tab versus spaces argument, and it derails everything for a certain period of time. In open source, there's a place for that person. It's like, you can go submit it here, you can do this, you can do that. Okay, we're not bringing that up again until you have actually something new. We all vote, we say it's new, and now we'll go and we'll look at it. That doesn't seem to often exist in standards. Those things happen over and over and over again because there isn't the type of tooling available to really help and catch all of those different kinds of things. And then, of course, you know, Mirko brought up the competition portion. That's also a very fundamental thing that ends up happening on all of these different portions, is there's this expectation of competition in regards to the standards, which to me is a very antithetical thing. And I have a hard time grokking it, because so much when I look at these processes, like the one that Mirko put up there, is to, you know, here's the different things we do in the order that we do it in. When I used to teach design theory on a college level in the early aughts for software development, you know, one of the things I often said is waterfall, agile, whatever, it's all still the scientific method. And if you're not doing the scientific method, you're not actually moving forward in regards to increasing your reality for these pieces. And so I feel like that ends up being one of the big things that we can bring to each other, is doing those different portions. And so when he was talking earlier about the process versus technical specifications, you know, one of the reasons why we were attracted to going over and doing some different stuff with IEEE was the policy of doing best practices first, and going through and doing all the research. What is everybody doing? How are they doing it? Things of that nature. And then coming in and doing those different pieces. And I think that that is something that does scale better to the technical community than some of the other different ways where you're like, just give us the specs and we'll just go do it, because we're like, the reality of it is, if you're moving fast, you don't know the specs yet. And you won't know, and you have to be careful as to how you implement those so you don't limit things. So I guess I'll end with talking about, let's build some bridges on that. Come on over to the Eclipse Foundation at OSCOV. I'll drop the link in chat so that we can actually go through and like work on some of these iterations together, because for the governance portion, it doesn't have to be that specific. There's a few required things, like you must have a license, but the majority of it ends up being shoulds or would be nices, not must haves. And I think it's a much better way to introduce this to a lot of the open source people versus some of the other things that end up being a little bit more painful.
Thank you, Silona, for your statement. Yeah, let's continue to build bridges. Was mentioned before, and now I kind of take the look to the other side of the river, or and invite Daniel from the German standards body DIN to talk about their activities. Just as a background information, there were also some attempts at the European level at StandICT, but so far they have not been continued, which is, yeah, maybe a sign by itself. Therefore, I'm quite happy that DIN tries to build a bridge from the other side. Daniel.
Yeah. Thank you, Knut, for introduction. Thank you, Silona, Mirko, for the valuable input. Yeah, I'm Daniel from DIN. I make it clear, like right from the beginning, I can only talk for DIN and a little bit for DKI. I won't speak for StandICT for good reasons. and I want to share with you my presentation. So it will be a little bit different to what we heard already. A little bit more on a practical approach we're having at Dean. I'm a leader of a strategic project, how to deal with the open source communities, with the whole development and stuff. Since I learned from literature, also from Knut and Mirko, we have de facto standardization and de jure standardization. It's like we're from the de jure standardization, and so this is a little bit the opposite of what we heard so far. Very briefly to our organization, Dean. We are the neutral platform for standardization in Germany. We're a private non-profit organization. We have around 800 employees, over 35,000 experts, over 34,000 Dean standards, and 69 Dean standard committees. So why is open source relevant for us? Also, right at the beginning. So our business will be standardization forever. We don't want to become the next open source foundation. This won't be a core business in the future. But digitization is almost everywhere. The needs of our stakeholders have changed. And we hope that open source can help us to improve the standardization process, to make our standards better. So my goal is to help our experts, our stakeholders, to have a better standard in the end. We want to evolve standardization. So what are our main goals? So we seek to incorporate open source implementation into state-of-the-art standardization processes and foster greater value to involve both in creating and utilizing standards. As I said, we want to give our experts the opportunity to supplement the standards with open source development and increase interoperability and outreach of the standards. We want to bring the standardization and open source communities together. Like all of you said already, bridging the gaps is very important, and I'm try to play the part of the standardization side, even though it's only Dean. So in our strategic project, we had a lot of conversation, obviously, trying to figure something out. And I mean, there are probably big demands when it comes to, hey, standardization world, you have to do that in case of open source. But we need to start on a little level. We need to show people that open source is a great thing, because you can probably imagine the people I am talking about are a little bit different to the people you are talking about from the open source side. So I need to tell them open source is a great idea, and we're starting on a low level in the first iteration. Our specifications should become open. We want to we created an open spec Dean specification with a Creative Commons license, which basically follows our established process. So that's why I'm telling you, we don't have to change that much. We only change the license, which is in a way a big thing, but not when it comes to the processes. So with this specification, it enables publication on external platforms. It also enables implementation into open source projects. It's very important for me to also mention open source hardware, since this is, in my experience or my point of view, open source is not only software, it's also part of hardware. And my goal is to enable free further development. Of course, everyone can develop the standard on their own, but we want to be a place where this further development can take place, to bring it back into like the other level of standardization or different next versions of a specification. So the open source spec is also free of charge. And with dual licensing, since the IPR is ours, there's no problem in transitioning into international standardization. So we also have the use case of open source add-on. We call it add-on because it's non-normative, decoupled from the standard itself, non-normative deliverable. It should complement the existing DIN and ISO standards and specifications with developments and implementations, for example, testing tools, reference lim implementations, and stuff like that. So the initiative and the legitimation should be or will be in the standardization bodies, because if the core product or the core thing are the standards, so it's very relevant to have the legitimation from us, like an official, let's say, DIN open source project with this legitimation. As I said, it's decoupled in case of releases to the standard, and yeah, to foster outreach to reach more people with such implementation. It's will also appear in our publishing houses. Right now, only in the DIN publishing house, but yeah, hope to get more on board. So we have 3 pilot projects. One of them is the International Workshop Agreement on Reference Architecture for Data-Driven Agri-Food System. There will be an actual open source development. So all of them, well, most of them haven't started yet, the projects, except for the digital twin for cities and communes. We're in the middle of discussioning of this IWA. And I'm trying to figure out how a maintainer role from DIN could be realized. And so since I'm not a developer, unfortunately, I cannot be on a technical area to maintain this project. But I really think it's very important to have this strong connection between the standard and the implementation itself. So I hope a good role for a DIN project manager, in that case me, could be maintaining the progression of the implementation and also the standard, and have a good communication between them. Yeah, this is like the use case of open source add-on. The use cases of open spec would be the digital twin for cities and communes and the battery passport. So we will publish them under Creative Commons license, and we want to provide a platform for further development, as I mentioned already. So what are our next steps? Of course, we want to run pilots and even more pilots. We have some in the pipeline already, and accumulate experience. We want to shape our concepts. We also want to expand our network, also by entering partnerships. So feel free to contact me. Also, if you have interesting projects. On the bucket list of our project is also to establish an OSPO, because we realize that there are also internal uses and needs for open source. So this would be a great thing to have an open source program office at DIN. Obviously, I think this is like a big discussion all the time, business models in open source projects. Also relevant for us because I need to convince like the standardization world that open source is a great thing, and yeah, like business cases are also relevant in that communication, as you expect. And of course, we want to share our experience with the standardization ecosystem with other national bodies, ISO, IEC, and StandICT. So this is another point of view. I bring this up because in communication, I was asked recently kind of often, how can we participate in standardization in case of the Cyber Resilience Act? So I just wanted to show you 2 ways of participating in standardization. One of them, and I think the most common one, is the national delegation, where you have mirror committees in every country. And in this mirror committee can be experts sent to the relevant working groups. Like in case of the Cyber Resilience Act, it will probably be the JTC 13, Working Group 9. And in Germany, we have a mirror committee for that. So get in touch with Martin. Don't bother. So I asked him to provide this email address. I mean, this is transparent, but just ask him if you can participate in the mirror committee. And like it's not impossible to participate in standardization, as it seems like some people feel. So. And another thing would be to create a liaison organization. Also provided here the Guide 25 link, where you can read if your organization would be an option. It would be an option for you for your organization to become a liaison, and then get in touch with the StandICT management committee. So, what else? My thoughts. This is very personal. And like not a complete list, just some thoughts on that, because as I said earlier, I really want the open source people perspective into relevant standardization activities. And I think, or I hope you feel the same way. So I think it's very important to have a coordination strategy, since there are many open source foundations who could be like a place for gathering people, but I think this it needs a bit of coordination and communication between them. Of course, it's necessary to identify relevant European standardization bodies and committees, like in case of the Cyber Resilience Act, it is the JCC 13 Working Group 9, but there are different IT regulative standardization projects running. So we need to identify them together and gather candidates, define roles, and I really hope to actively engage in relevant working groups on a national level. So come to DIN, but not everyone can come to DIN. You have your own countries, maybe, and go to the national bodies. So the more national bodies are involved and more people go there, the better. Like the more people we have in the committees, right? And I really think it is very important to become a liaison organization for some open source foundations like Linux, Eclipse Foundation, Oasis, also OFE, and many others. So I think this would be a great thing. Align comments with the community, because it's a consensus based when it comes to comments on the standards, and I think it's beneficial if you have conversation about what comments to do and stuff like this. And yeah, participate. This is very important. Participate in the meetings where comments are discussed and resolved to stand for the comments you bringing in. And also try to get funding via StandICT, and it was mentioned right at the beginning of the session, to make the entry barrier easier or lower. And last but not least, happy to have you. So it feels to me like I'm a little bit of an ambassador for also standardization, like in this case here, or ambassador for open source when it comes to my standardization world. Yeah, so I'm really interested in your needs. How can I help you? Is this the right place? I mean, this discussion will be probably brought up in about 20 minutes. And yeah, so that's that. Thank you. I think the questions come at the end, Knut, right?
Yeah. Thank you, Daniel. There are already some questions and comments in the chat you might have a look at, and we come back there then later, because I'd like now to give Jochen the floor and as last speaker, and then we have the overall discussion at the end. Therefore, Jochen, representing not industry but big industry, therefore yeah, we have to find also the industry which is a little bit smaller, kind of playing both open source and standardization game, but it's not so easy. Therefore, yeah, go ahead, Jochen.
Yeah, thank you very much, Knut, and thank you for having me, and thanks to all for giving your introductory perspectives. Let me just check. I'm now presenting, so I cannot see the chat, but you can hear me well, right?
Sure.
And you see well?
Yeah.
Okay, very good. Yeah. In preparing this session here, which comes super timely, and I will come to this in a minute, I think. So excellent timing also from StandICT in organizing this. I thought, what do I talk about? What do I want to talk about? I've been around for a while on talking about the interplay between standardization and open source, what it means. And I said, let's start also some forward looking. As we heard, a lot has been discussed here. We need to go forward looking as well. So I said, I give it the title, New Dynamics Needed, Standardization and Open Source in a Successful Ecosystem of Open Collaboration. And you will see what this means. I structured my presentation mainly in 4 parts. The first one, looking a bit how open source has been a key challenger to standardization. The second one, elaborating a bit on how I see the various levels and dimensions of the interplay of standardization and open source. The third one then, and this is what makes it so timely, looking at our current situation in Europe, where software is being regulated and what this means to open source. And finally, the urgency for a standardization ecosystem that meets the respective needs. So challenging. Several things that used to be done in standards bodies have increasingly been done in open source projects over the last 10 years. Open source has been highly disruptive to traditional standardization. Knut mentioned the study, it's in there. The study shows this. Open source is running code, and it's a fast way from innovative developments to deployment. And almost all standards bodies are looking for ways how to include open source into their scope and work, how to collaborate. I just put here 3 randomly chosen examples of what a standard can look like. Here you have a glimpse from the fairly recently published, just 2 months ago, ISO 42001 for the AI management system. I would call this a pretty much traditional standard. Of course, it's also a management system standard, which makes it probably even more traditional. So you see you have the controls, implementation guidance, these kind of things. Here you have a standard from W3C, the sub-resource integrity standard, doesn't matter which one it is. But what you can see is it looks slightly different, right? It addresses things differently. It has examples of source code included, also a standard. And here you have an example from something that luckily we have overcome. This is from the age of COVID, DP3T. The protocol that in the end has been underlying all the contact tracing apps that we may have used and luckily don't need to use anymore. This is interesting. It's pure source code, but it's a protocol. It became a standard. It was used everywhere. It was developed ad hoc by an open source community, initially originating out of Switzerland, academia in Switzerland, but clearly also a standard. So what I want to say is there are different types of standards. The format of a standard can be very different. Open source software can be a standard. Often APIs, protocols, etc. are nowadays directly developed in open source and not in a traditional descriptive way anymore. And agile standardization is taking place in a collaborative way, for instance, on GitHub or in open source foundations. Now, looking at the interplay of standardization and open source, it is not just that open source replaces standards, right? This is here what is happening in certain areas, as I just said, APIs, interfaces, protocols, open source software is the standard. This may be part of a standard or the entire standard right away. It's available then for fast implementation. Second, standards are implemented in open source. We already heard that in the talks from Mirko and Jory, from Daniel, that open source provides a way to implement standards as referent implementations, test implementations. It's also a way to promulgate the respective standards. Or standards are maintained in open source. This is where you have a dynamic relation between open source implementations, the standards, fast release cycles, fast feedback cycles, stable code. The project ECMA was mentioned, TC39 in ECMA, developing ECMA script, most commonly known as its prime implementation JavaScript, is a standard that is maintained in this way and further developed. Open source, of course, can implement standards, must implement standards when it comes to interoperability and when it comes to EU regulation now. So like any other software, open source may implement standards. The standards, however, need to be implementable in open source. Knut already in the beginning, in the introduction, mentioned IPRs, restriction-free, and this is especially important in areas like software interoperability. And finally, open source may complement standardization. You may have platforms, for instance, service layers, delivery layer platforms, non-normative parts around a standard. Daniel mentioned some of them. Tools, test environments, implementation environments, many kinds of things where open source may complement standards, but in a close interplay. Now, if we look at Europe and what we currently see, and where all of this now plays together, is we are seeing, as it were, a change, a significant change in EU regulation, which is moving from the traditional, let me call it traditional way of regulating products to the new way of regulating software. And the underlying concept is the same for all of this, is safety, protection, safety of people, workers, and working environments. So far we had these safety objectives applied to products for the single market. You had to fulfill them to be compliant to meet them. What we see now with the Cyber Resilience Act, the AI Act, the Data Act, and several other legal initiatives and acts is that these safety objectives are also established for interaction in the virtual world. Using technology in the virtual world, interacting, there shall be a certain level of protection of the people who are doing this, of the business-to-business interactions, etc. The CRA, the AI Act established this. This is a major extension because it means regulating software, and regulating software means regulating open source. A large majority, somebody calculated, and Knut may even have better figures here, that about 80% of all software being deployed nowadays in Europe is based on open source. I am not sure whether this has been clear to the legislators when they started the initiative, but it's a fact. And this is why we need to look into how open source can be compliant and can work in this regulation. Now, all of these regulations are done in a way that has been a huge success story for Europe, the new legislative framework, originally known as NUN approach. It works in a way that you have the legal requirements, the essential, so-called essential requirements, regulatory requirements, laid down in a legal act, but it is up to the market to develop harmonized European standards to define how you implement technology so that you meet the legal requirements. So the legal act foresees for this process. A formal standardization request is given to the European standardization organizations, and on this basis, the harmonized European standards are being developed, and when they are available, you can make your test against them. They allow, unless it is clearly forbidden, for self-assessment. You can make a self-assessment or work with a notified, so-called notified body, and then operate under the presumption of conformity. It's a very innovation-friendly system. It has been highly successful and highly relevant for the single market in Europe. And these processes are now being applied for the new regulations, which means open source needs to work with these processes. But the situation we're facing is, my assessment at least, the European standardization system is not fit for purpose for IT standardization in this respect. We do have structures and processes that don't really meet the needs of the IT sector. There is a distance between the actual stakeholders and the decision makers in the organizations. We already heard about the issues for open source to contribute here, get into contact. We can mend these, but we need to have better processes in the near-term future. There is a lack of agility and direct collaboration, in particular also with open source communities, but in general with the stakeholders, I would say. In bottom line is different structures and processes are needed for having an attractive and effective ecosystem in Europe for the development of IT standards that can be globally influential and that meet the needs of open source and IT, the IT sector in general. So the question I already raised at another point, and I raise again here, is, do we need something like a fourth European standardization organization, one that explicitly looks at the specifics for IT? We do need different processes, new processes for supporting a successful environment. Probably StandICT should play a key role here in developing these new structures, but Europe should clearly have the ambition of becoming the place where the IT sector, open source, standardization, innovate and standardize and move forward. 4 key points that I believe are essential here. There may be more. Linked to international standardization, especially JTC1. This has been the place internationally where IT standards have been done whenever they are relevant for global trade. The link is important. Also for open source software to become recognized here. And JTC1 does already have past processes, so processes where you can bring standards that come from open source. The Linux Foundation, who we heard earlier, have brought several already here. The Eclipse Foundation has. It's available at JTC1. The link to European standardization is important for the IT sector. Direct participation, very important. IT is dynamic, agile, direct. This also includes small, medium enterprises, civil society, all these hurdles having to go via this committee being delegated. It only takes time. It is not according to the nature of how IT has been operating over decades. 3, free availability of standards by mouse click. Again, it's a key principle in the IT sector. If you want to look at a standard, you want to go to the web, click and see it. Having to buy a standard is contrary to the actual nature, the culture of IT. This is even more important when you think about open source. An open source community that needs to implement the standards needs to have them available on click. How else should they, who should buy it for the community? Who should be able to have it and look at it? The system doesn't work. And finally, that was already mentioned by others, implementability in open source. We need IPR policies or respective policy options that allow for open source to work and implement the standards. Royalty-free, non-assert clauses are examples here. And with this, I am done with my presentation. Thank you very much. And I stop sharing and then also see you all again. And
Thank you, Jochen. Now we can kind of start to interchange, and I would say we have a look on who raised the hand. Is Deborah's hand still valid? Because I've never seen a question in the chat. Deborah? Oh, okay. Then there was Andy's comments. You want to kind of kick off the discussion, because you had several comments in the chat. Okay. Yeah, no, Andy.
Yeah. I can do. I mean, the points about the last speaker made about the integration of IT and agile working in open source communities it's exactly the same point as you get with communities whose access needs are not met by the technology. I thought it was just interesting that it's exactly the same kind of interaction that you really need to do if you want to build inclusive communities. You need not to exclude anybody, and at the moment people are excluded. Not only excluded by the gap between technology and their understanding, but also just simply by not having their needs to access systems met. I think it's particularly bad on the side of active participation in standards development, because it's not just turning up to a meeting and saying your piece. It's accessing documents. It's working with, I don't know what you call it, but the system that replaced LiveLink, for example, and it's just very, very difficult to cross that bridge.
Silona, you want to respond?
Yeah, I did this one presentation a while back at one of the open source things about tools that accidentally gatekeep. And I think it's like one of the chronic things that we see in the standardization process is there are so many things that could be revamped so that we didn't have to deal with these issues. Like, why do we have to deal with the identity thing over and over again? Wouldn't it be nice if we didn't have to make sure every single time we have a meeting that we grab everyone and we grab their affiliation and we do this and we do that and no. There's all these things that make those things hard to do that we could make easier for people. Yeah. And that's one reason I think that open source tools have so much to teach, because with the type of that we do with open source is we truly try to be globally focused, like, so one of the things that like Hyperledger that we ended up doing is we were having problems with the APAC community. So once we put everything into a wiki format and didn't have things on Google Docs and had it so that everybody could like come in, and had the translation stuff available and did all that, they could suddenly come in and participate like crazy. And they could sit there and have their own meetings in their own languages, bring it over, translate it, do it asynchronously, do it at 2 o'clock in the morning for us, because we're having meetings at 2 o'clock in the morning for them. And, doing all these other different things to prevent that gatekeeping. And so I really do feel like there's a lot that can happen here with the tooling. And I know with like NIN and DIN and Denom, they've all been looking at some of those open source tools to try to help with that, right? With like doing things like chat and those other different portions. The problem is it's not actually part of the standardization process. And so you end up having these conflicts between it. So how do we actually bridge that so that we can really, I totally get you, dude.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Thank you, Silona. Any other from the panel to respond to Andy's comments?
Well, can I add a comment to that?
Yeah, sure.
I think it's worse than I've expressed, because you've got to somehow deal with the siloization as well. And I mean, the siloization, we're all split into these different standards groups and we can't work together because our structures are all different. And that's really, really hard to solve. And I don't really think you can, because our organizations are embedded and will stay more or less as they are. So I think if you want to drive for open technology, it's got to come through those top levels. If you, for example, I mean, let's take the idea of doing stuff on wikis, which was just suggested. That's a great idea. Can you imagine trying to persuade an entrenched subcommittee of JTC1 to do it without direction coming from the top. It's very, very difficult. And we do all work in silos, and we've got to break that down a little bit. A lot of stuff, there are some areas which kind of apply across the board. Accessibility is one of those areas. It doesn't live in a silo. It doesn't live with this organization or that organization. It works for everybody across the board, or at least that's how it should work. So yeah, that's the way I think you've got to do it. I'm sorry, I don't remember the name of the speaker who suggested working through organizations at a JTC1 level, but I think he was right.
I think it was Daniel. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Andy. Now, Ken Kretschmer, your hand is up. Ken? I don't know.
Here we go.
Now, floor is yours.
Oh, good. Yes, I wanted to thank you very much. A number of good presentations, which I appreciated. But I guess my comment is about, I'm a theory person more than a practice person. There's been a lot of discussion of the difficulties in the practice, which I certainly am learning to appreciate more and more. But from a theory side, it is possible to create standards that are adaptable and therefore can respond to market or technical issues very quickly. And this is not a well understood concept, and it is a very rarely implemented concept. It has been done in some standards quite successfully, but it's rare. So the idea that there are adaptable standards, which are mechanisms that allow the underlying fixed standard to respond quickly with change level operations, and when change level operations don't work because the changes are too quick, the original standard is capable of falling back to the prior change. So compatibility is maintained. I can only refer you to various papers that I've written on the subject of the successions of standards and how the adaptability succession is the newest way to reach forward. And I think I just offer that as a theory that might be helpful to some of the concerns that have been spoken about. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Ken, and you also shared your paper. Jamie, you want to also kind of take the chance to join the discussion beyond the chat? No.
I do see a hand up, Knut.
Oh.
I think Deborah.
Yeah, Deborah, I don't know, she disappeared. But Jamie Clark, you want to elaborate a little bit your comments? I don't know, why are you muted? I cannot unmute you. No, Jamie.
Yeah, sorry, no, I did hear from you. Sorry, I'm trolling in other organizations as well at the moment, so I missed that a bit.
You want to elaborate a little bit your comments?
Well, just that I think we've heard a lot from open source people about how stuffy standards are, and one of Mirko's current colleagues did a presentation with me 8 years ago on that. Said, "Oh, standards are slow and open source is fast." And Knut, I have to say, I agree with what you said. I haven't heard a lot of change since. There's a lot of activity, there's a lot of stakeholders, there's a lot of money, but in terms of really advancing the collaboration between the two sides and each adopting the virtues of the other, the standards people have picked up a lot of the open source methodologies in terms of speed, community formation, Git repo use. I'm not sure the open source folks have picked up much from the standards people in terms of creating outcomes that are generally acceptable to regulators who don't want to adopt a monoculture. We have some glaring examples of large ecologies right now, which are very important to European policy, where they may or may not be under open source licenses, but there are concerns about the development, the community, and whether that work is isomorphic to a particular factory, a particular nation, a particular source. We haven't really solved the pro-competitive issues over on the open source side, and I would encourage people not to undervalue that problem. That's it, Knut. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Now, Mirko.
Yeah, I would like to comment on this. I think Jamie, you're right, there is not a lot of progress on this. How can we make open source results or outcomes more accessible to regulators? I think this is also one of the more difficult to solve problems. I think we did make a little bit of progress, at least on the theoretical side, on the relationship between open source and competition. I think it's in the study that Knut and I published as well, the argument that if you combine an open governance process with openly licensed results, basically, then this collaboration has a pro-competitive effect. The argument is in the paper. It's basically that if you provide something that is accessible to everybody with no restriction on use or user, then basically collusion between the involved actors is practically impossible. So on that side, there is progress, and I think regulators are coming around to see this argument. But I do agree that there's little progress on how do we make the outcomes of the collaboration in the open source community accessible to, well, this, for example, defining like minimum safety standards and things like that there, which is a valid concern. And yeah, so that's a topic to work on, basically.
Mirko, can we just put in an ad for the recent Malamud decision? Because the fact that we're about to have some disruption in the area of what technical standards that are enacted into law can remain royalty-bearing has just got to be good for the open source community, right? I mean, I can't see any other way than that Curia decision will help this debate somehow.
You won't hear me complain about that. Most certainly not. I mean, the statement that if a standard or a specification is expected to be respected by participants, that standards must then also be accessible to all the potential participants. And that's a strong statement, and that's I think, very welcome in the open source community.
Good. Since you mentioned Malamud, my plan is also to have another webinar on this topic, and then we get onto the issue of open access, and this is currently kind of really hot on the agenda at the SDOs, and I know also that different open source people want to comment on that, but I didn't want to put that here on board, because here we need certainly some representatives of SANELEC, and I don't know how high on the agenda to kind of elaborate a little bit on this point. But this is indeed, I mentioned this as a change in the regulatory framework. We have to see there are different interpretation of the decision. Some say it's really not really a game changer. Others are afraid that it might be a game changer. But I think this is worth to have it in a separate webinar. Also have maybe some legal folks to elaborate a little bit on the copyright issue beyond that. Therefore, I didn't mention that explicitly, but we are not forgetting this topic. Okay, Jochen?
Yeah, on Jamie's point, open source in the context of regulation, I think this is still a steep learning curve here on many sides, right? It's as I said in my talk, I still believe that the EU regulators had no idea when they were starting to discuss about CRA and all of this, that it is essentially affecting open source, right? The number of software that is not open source is now a fraction. I am also of the impression that there is still a lack of knowledge how open source is being developed. And it was, I think it was Mirko and Jory who had on their slide the different possible participants. And there is such a broad spectrum of participants, and there are different open source foundations, organizations, communities, also a broad spectrum, and sorting out now with which ones to collaborate when we come to addressing open source in the context of regulation, etc., is all still an area that where there is limited knowledge available on all sides, and also from the open source foundations. Somebody who would like to contribute here and approaches standards bodies is now every community that is doing something on GitHub, someone to liaise with from a standards body perspective. Is it open source foundations that have a legal entity? How to work together are things then on the detailed level, right? On the theoretical high level, you can say, yeah, let's please all work together. But on this detailed level, it's something that is new ground, and we are all here to learn and have to explore this. What are the good ways to interact here? Also on the political level, how are the policymakers being advised on open source? Is there an open source advisory council? Is there something, the European Commission has something like an OSPO, but it's mainly internal focused so far. It's looking at how to use open source within the Commission and within EU initiatives. Is something needed like an open source council as an advisory group to policymakers? Many things we need to look at when we address this. Going also beyond the interplay between open source and standardization, I think. The tough thing is currently that it comes all together with regulations like the CRA, where there is some time pressure also to sort out things properly and make sure that all the software that is being developed in open source can implement these standards, that all the open source developers can contribute to setting the standards, because they are the ones. In industry, we always say those who are affected by the standards need to be there on the table to develop them, yeah, because we will have to implement them. And this gets a new dimension when we look in all of these software regulations that we now have in Europe.
Thank you, Jochen. I can just kind of echo that. And I also looked at our recommendations, which we made 5 years ago. And I think open source has to also be integrated in the general IPR framework. And that's not the case. And even software is not explicitly kind of integrated. That means there's much work also to be done for the regulator. But Mirko.
Yeah, I want to basically extend a little bit on what Jochen said, because I totally agree with him, first of all. But second, we always say like open source in the context of regulation. But I think there are at least two aspects when we ask what aspect of open source in the context of regulation. When it comes to the outcomes of the work, like the basically source code or whatever it is developed by the community that's openly licensed. Question is, what must be regulated about that? I would say rather little, because it is not the responsibility of the open source communities to provide products that are safe to use. That's the responsibility of manufacturers. And quite interestingly, if you look at how the EU is going at regulating that, and you look into the Cyber Resilience Act, that is exactly the differentiation that the EU is making. It says open source software stewards can release software, and they should try to make the software as secure and safe as possible. But it's the manufacturer's responsibility when they bring it into the market that the products are working according to their requirements. So in terms of products, a simple way out would be to like stick to this definition and say it's the manufacturer's choice. And then the manufacturers will, if they're smart, automatically realize that they should collaborate upstream to develop those parts together that all of them need. And that's kind of how open source works today. The other dimension is process. And I think this is basically means open governance. And at the same time, and Silona will probably now chuckle, we struggle a lot with defining what open governance is, which is surprising because we always talk about it. Like, how can you say a process is fully open governed? There are many open source ways, that's what we say. But if I would be a regulator, I would say, do as you wish, but I have certain standards on how open your processes must be for you to be considered openly governed. And I think that's partially in the CRA, very carefully touched. So basically, on the process side, we can impose governance requirements on collaboration to see, is this really pro-competitive? Is this an open process that is available, is accessible to everybody? So I think this is where when we want to answer this question of like open source in the context of regulation, we need to dig in and break it up and say what aspect of open source in the context of regulation. And then there's at least process and products that need to be considered separately.
Thank you, Mirko. Okay, any other hands up? No, don't see. Then I think we can come to an end. I think it will be not the last webinar on this topic, because we will see, or we are seeing different developments, and one is Malamud, but there are other regulatory activities and initiatives in the field, and also Jochen and myself, we put that on the agenda of the German strategy forum on standardization. We have to see what will be the implication there, and then we can maybe even feed that back to the European level. And I'm not sure whether it's not yet on the high-level forum on standardization. I think that's maybe another venue to bring the different topics together. But I think at least we have seen different presentations and the willingness to build the bridges from both sides, and maybe we can also convince the European CENELEC level to take this topic again on board, although being not an easy and fast quick win to expect. As I said, I look back 5 years, and the regulator kind of is a little bit changing the game, but kind of the involved parties there, we see some inertia in the sense, okay, everybody does his thing, and here and there small tries, but I think we need some kind of sustainable view on these two topics to make progress. And that's my concluding remarks. Thanks the speakers, thanks also the discussants and the contribution. Thanks to us for providing a platform. The material will be uploaded on the StandICT homepage, therefore you can still kind of have a look at that and also spread it in further kind of communities. As already mentioned in the chat, on Wednesday there will be the closing event of the OFE launch, where probably some of you might also show up again. Here I try to also get a little bit the standardization people on board, and maybe they might also join the event on Wednesday. That's it from my side. Thanks a lot. Have a nice evening, nice dinner, and see you soon. Definitely, if somebody is interested in also to get here slots at our webinars, please contact me. And Jamie just mentioned Malamud. That's definitely one topic. The other topic on my agenda is the forthcoming SEP, Standard Essential Patent Regulation. Another hot topic to discuss, maybe with some other also people and stakeholders, which I haven't seen, at least not many of them today, but there's a strong interest also to talk about this topic, and therefore it's not getting boring in this field, and thanks for that. Have a nice evening and see you soon. Some of you I see